And welcome to Whiskey Politics. Dave Sussman here, your host and purveyor at Whiskey Politics. You can find me at davesussman.com. You can find our channel over at YouTube. Please subscribe. You can also find us on all of our podcast applications, including Apple Podcasts. Please rate us and leave a comment. It helps the algorithms and other folks find us. And of course, we're at the Ricochet Network as well. And we are delighted to announce a new platform this week. It is called Range Broadcasting. Download the Range Broadcasting app at rangebroadcasting.com. From there, you can access all of our exclusive programming from some of America's top hosts and influencers. The Range is your best source for news, opinion, and commentary on the events happening at home and around the world. Catch all of our live streaming programs, on-demand archives, and audio podcasts. And today's show, we're going to be talking with Katie Hopkins. She's returning to the show. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of issues. You saw recently that she was just expelled, cast out from Twitter. What did she do that was so wrong that finally was the last straw for the folks up in San Francisco? Not all that much, but we're going to be talking about that, and we're going to be talking about how the tech moguls, especially on Twitter and San Francisco and Palo Alto and Facebook and YouTube, Google, are really, are in essence controlling the conversation now. And where do we go to have that conversation? All we're asking for is to have open dialogue, to be in the marketplace of ideas. The town square today, the water cooler that we all used to grow up with, is no longer existent. Where we talk is online. And if one side of the political aisle can no longer be involved in that debate, then, well, it's not really a debate anymore, is it? It's just a monologue. And who is giving that monologue? It's the one side, groupthink, and the coercive action of manipulating people into thinking a certain way and not allowing the freedom to have opposing ideas to discuss why we should be talking about certain things that is verboten. And we're going to be talking about those things today. Katie Hopkins is here. You know we will. We're going to be talking about Black Lives Matter. We're going to be talking about some of the issues that we're seeing right now in England that unfortunately we're also seeing here in the United States regarding freedom of expression and freedom of speech. Why were there riots and why were there protests all throughout Europe? Wasn't what happened with George Floyd an American situation? Wasn't it systemic racism in the United States? That's what we've been told, that America is a horrible, horrible country with ghosts of the past. Then why are we seeing these protests in England? Why are we seeing these protests all over the globe? It's something bigger. So we're going to be getting into it with Katie. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I always do. And Katie's going to be joining us from England. So pour yourself your favorite drink, sit back, relax, and enjoy the Whiskey Politics interview with Katie Hopkins. And to welcome back to the show, I'm delighted to have returning somebody that I've met many times and we've had on Whiskey Politics for a long form is columnist Katie Hopkins. Welcome back, Katie. How are you?
Oh, I'm very well. Thank you for having me on. I've met you and I've met your mother.
You've met my mom. And she said, last time she met you, I took her home and we went straight into the living room and we turned on Homeland. Was that the name of your documentary?
Homeland, that's right.
Yeah, fantastic. Everybody should check out Homeland, find it on YouTube. You talk about, obviously, the impact of immigration, anti-Semitism all across Europe. And it's definitely something that a lot of people should be talking about. They're certainly talking about it here in the United States, and that may be a topic that we can get into right now. But I want to jump straight into it. You've made some breaking news this week. A lot of people were shocked to find that the lovely Katie Hopkins, who's never said anything controversial, was banned from Twitter. What happened?
I know. So we all knew this day would come. And we all knew that there would always be a time when I was eventually banned, as so many of us have been before. So I think we always knew that day was coming, and it didn't necessarily need to have a reason. And that's certainly been true. So by the lobbying of the masses, by the power of Muslim organisations and well-funded leftist organisations in the UK, they have been able to get Twitter to remove me. They came up with a tweet that they used as evidence of my hatred, which was actually a quote from Blackadder, which makes it all the more amusing in a way. But yes, the way they celebrated me ticking over into 1.1 million followers, which even then is a repressed number. The numbers were actually far bigger. The way they celebrated that was by taking away my blue tick and then suspending my account, and then actually going straight to the press and telling them that it was a permanent ban. I still haven't actually been told that by Twitter.
So I've seen the term permanent suspension, which is kind of contradictory. But what you said, it was a phrase, as you refer to Blackadder, which is a comedy in an old school one. Yes. in England. And you were reacting, from what I've read and seen, you were reacting to somebody that was attacking you online, threatening sexual violence against you. And you refer to them or something like hung like a baboon. Is that what it was? Yes.
Exactly. So many people that will have followed my accounts will know that one of the ways I deals with the threat or attacks on my family or attacks on me is to kind of knock it back. So if someone says, go yourself, I'll say, okay, done. What's next? So, I will always come back with that kind of stuff. This was somebody threatening me using, we don't need the words, but I said, oh, really? If he's going to do that, as in attack me violently, sexually, he better be hung like a baboon. And I guess the closest reference point for that is hung like a donkey. It's about testicular fortitude. And it's actually in the Urban Dictionary. It's also actually in my old Twitter bio. It says hung like a baboon. It's one of the expressions people use about me because I'm kind of ballsy. And somehow, I guess with all that's going on with Black Lives Matter, someone's managed to make it racist, which is absolutely, in fact, I think it probably indicates racism on their side, because I would never have associated that with a racist comment.
Yeah, it's complete projection, isn't it? But Twitter states that in some way, saying that, and do you have any idea what the race or ethnicity is of the online attacker?
Oh, no. And no. It would never have. It would never even have dawned on, it wouldn't be a question to me. That would be an answer I would give no matter who.
So not understanding who the online attacker is ethnically, what their race is, hung like a baboon, which is, again, been in your subheading of your, when you ID yourself, and you have like a little short bio. And that somehow creates an unsafe space on Twitter, yet they allow for millions of people across the globe to attack public heads of state like Boris Johnson or Donald Trump with some of the most vitriolic filth that you could see out there, threatening, their lives and things like this as well. Double standard much?
I think it's that. I think, for me, the ban isn't really, it has nothing to the few things that I'm very sure about. One, you cannot rationalize it, because there is no rule that I broke. It's not rational because the other side can do what they want and we can't. So there's no way of rationalizing it. It is just the removal of somebody who was quite popular on the platform. And I think the other thing is, and I'm loathed by the commentary that says, well, it's another blow for free speech. Because I think that's actually using this as a way of imagining free speech exists. It hasn't existed in the UK for probably close to a decade. We have policing laws against truth. When truth becomes hate speech, telling things as it is becomes a policeable event. That's the UK. So that's my only thing is, one, you can't rationalize with tech censorship. And two, it's not about free speech at all. This is purely about the fact that there is only one approved narrative. And unless you have that, you will not be able to engage with these private platforms because they will not accept alternative viewpoints. So it's a sort of a nuanced debate, but it definitely isn't. There isn't free speech. And I wouldn't want this to be used as some way of having the argument about whether there is free speech or not. Ask any American, ask any Brit, dare they open their mouths and say what they actually think? And I'm suspecting that in most cases, if you're over the age of 25, the answer's no.
You know, this idea of the dialogue that we're having right now and people trying to understand it, where we're seeing these riots and looters and the peaceful protesters as well, and certainly justification to protest what we saw in Minneapolis. Nobody disagrees with that. But at the same time, the idea that so many people are coming out with these I'm seeing this in the United States. You're seeing this in England. They're trying to take down statues of Churchill, who fought against Nazism and totalitarianism and fascism in World War II. We're seeing it here in the United States. They're going after Washington and Jefferson and Grant and all, you know. Do we have an education problem, Katie, in Western, in the Western countries right now, where we've got this entire generation of people who have no idea who they're trying to take down now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's some kudos to be gained by the left, because if this was a business model and you had a long-term strategic plan, this would be in your 10 to 20 year strategic plan, the entire re-education of a generation in order to change the world order. And so in a way, the brains behind this thing have been pretty full on, because they have worked out that the re-education of an entire generation or two, because the teachers are teaching this stuff, will result in this new world order, or whatever phrase we put on it, a change in the dynamic of the whole of the globe. And that's what we're seeing play out. I think the positive for me in all of this, and I agree, it's dark and it's hard to find a positive, but if there's a positive, I'll find it. And the positive is that the battle between darkness and light has been brought into sharper focus, even starker contrast. And I do think, at least in the November election, for example, we are moving away from it being Republican, Democrat, and much more about right or wrong, or are you voting for more riot, more, Chaz, or are you voting for law and order, decency, what we used to know? And that's what this election has gone into much more of almost like a tabloid speak. It's made politics drop down to a level of universal understanding, I think. That's my take on it.
What is your sense right now? We saw, obviously, in December, an election that you called, by the way. I saw you before the December election, and you said that the Conservatives are going to come on strong. We are a few weeks away, 3 weeks away from deal, no deal. What's your outlook on Brexit?
So exciting. So 25 days to go, then we leave the EU. You have it from me. You have its cast iron guarantee. I know it's a risk I'm doing this, but we are out. On the 31st of October, we leave the EU. And I believe there will be a deal. But you know what Boris has said repeatedly? He said it yesterday, said it the day before. If they don't give us a deal, no deal and we're good and we're gone. So finally, after 3.5 years of waiting under Theresa May, 76 days, and Boris has got the job done, which is why Boris will be our Prime Minister, I think, for a very long time to come.
Do you see a special election being called, and are you concerned about the Corbyn and Labour taking back?
I'm so excited for it. There will be a general election. Boris will win. I think he will now take home a massive majority. And the one thing we don't need is any splitting of our vote. What we don't need is the Brexit Party and Farage. Well, if Boris Johnson delivers, as promised, 31st of October, it's time for us all to recognise we're on the same bench, we're on the same team, we cannot split the vote, and we cannot end up with Jeremy Corbyn in at number 10. So everybody needs to get behind Boris. Hashtag back Boris.
And they did. They won more seats than they have since 1987, and Labour now has fewer seats than they've had since 1933. Yes. Is this a trajectory that you think continues, or is this a direct response to Brexit? What are you seeing?
Yes. So in the UK, it's very much a kind of last South African sense. We're down the last couple, and therefore it's all in or bust. But really and realistically, when you look at and these are big strategic themes, you and I are talking here. But if you look at it, what are we now? 2020. By 2042, I think, but 2040, Muslim births outnumber births to all other. and this isn't a religious point, it is just plain fact that Muslims vote with the left, they vote Labour, they vote for socialist style policies and more benefit, bigger state. And so by 2040, it's more or less all over here in the UK. So whatever we get, we will probably get another 5 years of a Conservative. I'm not certain that would be under Boris. After that, demographics dictate it's over. But certainly in December, what you had was that sense of, we cannot let this country fall so fast. And it was a brilliant and beautiful thing. It was emotional because, you know, our Jewish friends had their bags packed at their front doors the night before that election on the 12th of December. And they were ready to go the next day to Israel if Labour got in, because the Muslim power base would be so strong they would be hunted down. And our brilliant, brilliant Indian communities, our Indian diaspora here is the best of us. They work harder than us. I don't mean to generalize in a racial way, but our Indian community have their children work so hard at school. They are the best of Britain.
Yeah.
The Indian community used to be working class, vote Labour, and they did that same thing where they came over to the Conservatives because their desire for law and order and to thrive as a family was much more important to them. And actually I see it happening when I spend time near Mexico on your southern border. There's such power in that southern Mexican strong communities. They are Republicans through and through. Mm-hmm. Those decent Mexican strongholds, they are such good Trump supporters because they want to work hard. They want their family to do okay. They can't stand the indecency of the Democrats. So there are many parallels between great communities that aren't necessarily perceived as American. They are from another grouping, but they are key and they're our core strength that we have, you know, both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've always said, and you know I'm from England and I go back.
Yes.
I've always said, if you want the best Indian culinary experience in the world, go to London. It's, you know, it really is. It's terrific, terrific food. But let me, we talk about Boris Johnson, and you know, I was delighted, and many people, you know, right of center, conservative types, just common sense types across the world were happy to see the results of the election. But Boris has gone a little bit after he got the COVID, and you know, he obviously recuperated. He's gone a little bit quiet lately, and you know, especially in the face of the protests and the tearing down of the symbolic statues and the history in England. Where is he?
And it's this there's a magazine, it's an online magazine called Spiked, and many of the right wing types of people love what they do because they seem to argue our types of stuff. They seem to be strong on kind of common sense. But actually the guys behind that magazine were former members of the Communist Party. At heart they are Marxists, and it seems like this leftist brand has really gripped Boris Johnson. So we haven't seen any of the dynamism that we had before the election. We haven't seen any of the strong on law and order or strong on immigration that we had before the election. We've got a very diminished Prime Minister. And I think some of the commentary out there that's been about how Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister for great times, but is not the Prime Minister for coronavirus times. And I think that's absolutely right. I think because it's so left of field, coronavirus and a lockdown and what is this thing, it's gone against anything he ever grew up learning and knowing about. And he hasn't been smart. And he's seen, and I see him as much weakened. He is not relating to the ordinary people, my kind of people from the sidewalk, the lady down at the checkout at the cooperative store. He's missing them. It's like he's lost his feel for the country. When he lost his taste and smell with Corona, did he lose his feel for this country as well? Yes, I think he did.
What would you suggest that he does right now? Because you've still got a lockdown, don't you? You're starting to come out a little bit. I've got cousins and friends in England, and we're doing, Zooms, and, they're just, locked down for 4 solid months at this point.
Yeah, and you know what? Where I am, I'm in a place called the rest of the UK.
Yeah.
And sometimes here it can feel quite normal because there's people out on their bikes. My neighbours are out. It's quite sociable. It's a villagey feel. When I go to London, you suddenly realise what lockdown means. There is no one on the train. There is no one at Paddington or King's Cross. The what we would call here in the UK the centres of places where there's usually thousands. No bars, no nothing, no hotels allowing people in. I had to blag my way into these places using my dastardly means. So this place is very locked down, and we're currently hiding our unemployment figures under this furlough scheme that we have. So people are still being paid their wages. People think they still have a job to go to, but you speak to any business leader and those people are not being brought back.
They're showing statistics here in the United States that anywhere between 50 to 80% of independent restaurants are not going to be able to reopen. We're seeing, obviously, unemployment numbers. There's 30 to 40 million people unemployed. That doesn't include the gig workers that are no longer doing, Uber drives and things like this. People aren't working in Hollywood right now. It's a tidal wave globally of epic proportions, which is going to slow down the economy. And right now, the stimulus packages that are being pumped into the economy by Western countries is kind of, I think, kicking the can down the road for the real horror show that's going to begin once the stimulus ends. How do you think that impacts electorally England when you take a look at it from that perspective?
Yeah, I think electorally people still haven't woken up to the impact of coronavirus and the lockdown. And just to be clear, the Brits were very different to Americans. And as ever, I was looking to America for hope. I was in New York when you guys locked down. I was forced onto a plane by British Airways staff who came and wrestled me out of Central Park. And I was very much with the American attitude. I've never believed in it. I've always said lockdown is the greatest hoax in human history. But here, they loved it. Brits loved lockdown. They were on their knees immediately, and that was before Black Lives Matter. They were wanting to stay indoors. They were reporting their neighbours. They were demonstrating their piety by kind of kowtowing to the hedgerows if you came past. This place, it was sickening how much the Brits love being told what to do by the state, and even by other TV idiots like Piers Morgan. I saw on girlfriends' chat groups, well, what did Piers Morgan say? Like they needed to ask someone on TV for permission to take a pee. That was the UK. And so I think people have really internalized this fear. Many are still too frightened to go out. My sister won't let my parents out still. I think also many of people have gone to this thing of looking to the state for answers. And that, as you know, is a very Democrat socialist position. So there is much emboldenment to be had by the left because they promise free everything anyway. And all people want right now is free everything. And if I could give you a quick example, we just had free school meals. It was something that I know you have in New York. I saw the schools staying open to hand out free school meals. What that means in holiday time here is a voucher for the supermarket. So they receive a $25 voucher per child, per family. And because of a petition by a well-known footballer, I repeat, footballer, soccer player, Boris did a U-turn and will now give free school meals out during the whole of the holidays, which we are already seeing being abused. Parents are using that for alcohol and tobacco. And also it means that parents, this idea that, as a mother, I'm responsible for feeding my children. I know that's gone. Everybody was on the side of this free school meals. Oh, the poor children. No one ever challenged, or certainly I did just before I was banned. Where's the question about personal accountability? And so we are definitely moving to that place where the state provides. The state will provide for everything. The universal income is basically the furlough scheme. There is now talk of this. The government should provide your Wi-Fi. The government should provide your basic food rations. We are rapidly heading towards Venezuela, and the government that will support all of that is the Labour Party, and they now have a very electable leader.
Who's the leader?
Yeah, he's a guy called Keir Starmer. And if I can describe to your audience someone they'll remember, people will remember Tony Blair.
Yes.
He was the guy that, if you describe, looked like he was a Republican, he's kind of relatively good-looking, suit, smart, spoke very well, clearly very educated, very much the centrist. That's what they've now got back. They have somebody who appears visually like Tony Blair. He's quite well cut for the cameras. He speaks very well. He's very smart. But behind that, he is far more left than Tony Blair. He's not a true centrist. I wish I'd sent to you before, Labour, their Father's Day card that they put out. I mean, really, it's unbelievable. Well, except it's so believable. Obviously, it's a BAME, perhaps father or trans individual with a child that doesn't look anything like whatever I mean, it's the most right-on Father's Day card you've ever seen, possibly not featuring a father, certainly not a child. That's the direction the vote is headed, and Keir Starmer is very, very electable.
So when we take a look at somebody like him, you see him as a more of a Tony Blair centrist. Tony Blair got along very well with both Clinton and George W. Bush. And does he carry any of the baggage that you saw with, Jeremy Corbyn and the anti-Semitism and the relationships with Hamas and Hezbollah and everything that we've been talking about for years? No,
they did a really smart thing when they brought in Keir Starmer. They were going to have, and of course the supporters wanted Jeremy Corbyn's sidekick. They got rid of her. They brought in what you would expect them to bring in when they bring in a leader that they want to get behind. Smart, sharp-suited, no anti-Semitism record, no issue with Hamas and all the rest of it.
Okay.
Actually, when he used to be director of public prosecution, so he's a smart player in terms of the establishment, he actually was very lenient on the Muslim grooming gangs. He presided over one of the biggest grooming gang scandals in history and didn't want the police brought to account because they might be seen as racist. So he's seen as an ally of the large Muslim population that's growing fast here.
Yeah.
So Boris Johnson is in trouble at the next election.
When would the next election be? I know that it's called at a moment's notice. What are we looking at?
We should be looking at, a 5-year term. I fear that so we will leave the EU unless something else happens, which we're not putting out on 2020, right? No one's predicting anything for 2020. We should leave the EU on the 31st of December, 2020. Yes, that's correct. However, after that, will Boris be able to retain power? I don't know. Could there be something that creates a challenge for leadership in the Conservatives? Yes, I think there could be. So the short answer is 5 years. But at the moment, with everything being so up in the air, I think one of the things Corona and other stuff has done is taken away any sense of certainty about anything.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the civil unrest that we're seeing. In the United States, obviously, Black Lives Matter, which I talked about this on my last show. There's two sides to Black Lives Matter. There's the description or the adjective, where we all agree, everybody, Black lives, everybody's lives do matter. And what we saw in Minneapolis is unacceptable, unconscionable, and there needs to be ramifications, and we need to prevent that from happening again. Nobody disagrees with that. But then there's the second side, and that the other side of the coin is the organization itself. Black Lives Matter is inherently a far leftist supporter of far left issues. And if you go to blacklivesmatter.com and click on the donate button, you can see that the hyperlink that it takes you to Act Blue, which is supporting far leftist, socialist, Democrat Socialists of America type candidates, funding organizations like NARAL, the pro-abortion rights groups, and others in the United States. And a lot of people don't see that. But how did Black Lives Matter in the United States and what took place in Minneapolis become an issue across the world, including in England?
You could almost feel the tentacles of the thing coming. So there was the George Floyd incident. And then mysteriously in that same week, certain things happened. Over here, a lady who worked on the transport, she's part of the transport kind of authority, she actually died, unfortunately, with coronavirus. And there was a suggestion she had been coughed at or spat at by someone with, it was a horrible story. It just so happened, they released the report into this lady's death, she was a lady called Belly, that there was no further investigation because there was no evidence that this happened. And of course, then that linked to George Floyd. Well, why hasn't Belly got justice? She died, she was spat at, she's a transport worker, she's an ethnic minority. Why was there no justice for Belly? And of course, it didn't take much for someone like me who knows how this stuff works to realize they released that report on that day on purpose. And then let's go to France. France had its own guy, somebody that died in police custody a year or so before. Suddenly his name was brought up. And it was like the organization that is Black Lives Matter in every country created their own George Floyd shooting. So we all had our own George Floyd, and we had the impetus of what was going on in America. And that was enough here for it all to kick off. And I spent some time at personal risk, I would say, and I realized that when I was amongst the Black Lives Matter protesters on that first weekend when they gathered tens of thousands of them in London. And I kind of annoyed them even more after the event when they realized I was amongst them, but I wanted to be a part of them and listen to them. And my biggest takeaway from being part of the Black Lives Matter protests, in the sense I was very present, was that all of them, they get to a point, they get to a rallying point, they turn up, they're excited, they're animated, they've got their hair and their makeup and their earrings and their protest wear. But once they get there, they don't know what to do. Protests have lost their purpose. They turn up and the numbers are big, but when they get there, you can see it's almost like a question mark hanging over their heads. What do we do now? And that's where, if we were smart and if our security operations were smart, we would give them purpose. We would make them march from A to B, and when they get to B, we would give them something to do. It's almost like dealing with children. I need to occupy my children. If you don't occupy protesters, they trash stuff. And that's exactly what happened every time.
The idea that these kids, and most of them are kids, they're teenagers and 20-somethings, and I think we're seeing the organization behind the scenes of these dark, shadowy, far leftist groups that are, putting pallets of bricks around the city so rioters, can go ahead and take out stores and things. But by and large, most of the people that we're seeing in the streets are of a younger age. We were all young once, some of us more so than others. You're younger than me. But, when we went through that stage of feeling rebellious and, rage against the machine type approach of things, I didn't see the level of violence on issues that we were angry about. We would never have considered, we had some fun as kids, but we would have never have considered tearing down the institutions. Is there a different level of anger that we've ever seen? The closest a lot of people in the States are comparing it to is the 1968 riots. We had 2 assassinations that year. What's changed with our child rearing, our generations, our education that has led to what we're seeing right now, which is global?
Yeah, I think that's so right. I think it's really interesting, actually. I hadn't thought about it till you were just talking in that way. But if I think about my own childhood, and mine would have been stricter than many, I went to an all-girls convent run by nuns. But the rules there, the uniform, I had a kilt. The kilt had to be sewn up in case we flashed our pants. Oh, I'm so sorry for the noise. In case we, displayed our assets to the boys' school. We had this time and that time, and this was done then. And you stood in your line and you didn't move, and no one questioned Sister Nuala. And at home, my father was in charge, and our dinner was on the table at 5 p.m. and we did our homework, and this was the rules. And if you broke the rules, my father, you didn't mess with my dad. And so my rebellion was getting a rucksack, meeting my mate, and going off to Indonesia for 6 months backpacking on the road, because it was the least rule-bound thing you could do. And that's my sense of it, is our kids have family who want to be their friend and pertain to be their friend and have very few rules. And I'm generalizing, obviously, but I see it in others. They want to be friends with their children as opposed to parents. And in schools want to be friends with their kids. Schools want to be their best buddy with their teacher or have their counselor as their mate. And I don't know who gives rules to young people anymore. And my sense is the only thing, therefore, that they rebel against, there's no dad like I had, and there's no nuns in a school system and rules. So the thing they rebel against is the next thing, which is the state. And that's the only take I can have on it, is that's the first place they find some sort of line that will reject just giving into them.
Listen, I grew up with a very strict British father, very strict. Okay, we got the belt when we were kids, not often, but when we messed up, there was a response, and we knew not to mess around with Dad. He loved us. I loved him. He was a great man, and so on. But he was the World War II generation, and he didn't put up with it, in a British term, he didn't put up with any guff, right? And so when lights out was lights out, and you turn your lights out. We're seeing now, you refer to a couple of I guess sociological progressions that have taken place over the past 30, 40 years, where you're seeing inner city fatherless homes. You're seeing, as you refer to, Katie, parents wanting to befriend their kids and not parent their kids. What we are seeing right now in London and New York and Los Angeles and other cities around the globe, when you've got these kids that are tearing down statues, you don't have that response from the authorities, because the authorities are now scared to death that they're going to be blasted again for racism or whatever it is, and they're letting these kids free range tear down the cities. Don't you need that disciplined response now from the state if the parents aren't going to step in?
Yeah, and interesting. I spent some time, so when the Black Lives Matter protesters were regrouping for a second weekend, and we knew Churchill and the Cenotaph were going to be a target. A group of lads, I'm not associated with them, but I was in with the protesters, made a little perimeter fence around Churchill. They stood and they tried to, I saw them as the protesters came by. They said, nothing against you, we're with you, Black Lives Matter, absolutely. We just want to look after this chap, referring to Churchill. And it's all very peaceful, but then the kind of more militant arm of the protesters came through. The police officers forcibly removed the gentleman trying to defend Churchill. And the police officers actually were on the lad's side, as police officers often are. They're decent souls. And they were very clear, having spoken personally with the guy that was removed, who was trying to defend the statue. The police officer said, our supervisors have made it clear we are to give these protesters free run. We are not to get in their way. We're not to stop them. Basically, the directive was, let them run riot and we will pick up afterwards. And I think that's the duplicity of policing that is increasingly frustrating. And I'm going to say to white individuals like myself, is that if I were to try such a thing, based on my colour alone, I would be taken out. And I accept that. If you come from a different colour, there is a different policing system now. And that's where we're seeing, we spoke earlier about the different treatment on Twitter. Now we have this different treatment of policing. Then we're going to have different treatment by the government when we have black economic empowerment, which will certainly be coming our way off the back of this.
Do you see that as a constant, or is this just a blip in time and it's going to go back to semi-normalcy soon?
No, this doesn't go back. So this is the continuum of, you and I have spoken often. Anybody that knows me will know me banging on. Sometimes, well, much to my own cost, but it's sometimes making me sound like a lunatic. But the continuum of where we're all at, South Africa, UK, America, and my plea to America, do not fall as we have fallen. And then my reflection of South Africa down to 4% whites, where whites are actively hunted out of the country. And this is a continuum we are on, and we are moving towards the South African model. And I think one of the things for your listeners is to think, as many of them will have already thought, I talk a lot about the invisible movement of people, my Jewish friends moving to Israel, my nice British or Indian friends in the UK, it's not about white, moving further and further out. We're going to all end up on the coastline very, very soon. You and I have spoken about this.
Yeah.
And then you look in America, and it's something that's not being talked about much in America, in the media or in a book, or it's the migration of America. And I think if someone had that charted up, the sheer volume, and what are people actually trying to do? They're trying to find a little bit of America. And I suppose the question I would ask to your audience is, where will that be? Where will be the defendable America?
That's the question, because even in red states, again, you and I have been chatting about this, even in red states, the cities are run by Democrats than they are deep blue. Even red states like Texas, Dallas, Houston, Austin are deep blue cities now.
Yeah, exactly. Spend any time on the streets of Austin and you will realize very quickly. I mean, I realized when I got, lynched trying to talk on campus. But so my question is, where will America stand? Where will it, if you have to retreat to a defendable state, where is that state going to be? And
I think that's smart.
We should be pushing that. Yeah, we should be pushing for an answer to that.
Yeah.
And we should be thinking smartly about how we achieve that, because it may be that you cannot achieve it you cannot achieve it across all states. What is going to be the state that you can defend?
Yeah, well, and you got states like Idaho where you've got a moratorium right now. The city council in Boise are now trying to stop Californians from moving in, not just because they're raising property prices. You think that's a good problem to have, but it's also because of the politics that they're bringing in. The problem is that it's spreading. It's metastasizing. Last question for you. I know you've got a hard stop here, Katie, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time. And I want to talk about you. I want to talk about you, how you present yourself, because the person that we all see and either love or hate, depending upon your perspective, on YouTube and online and interviews and such, is a lot different than the person that I've gotten to know and meet over the years. And when you do smaller presentations, you have groups. I've seen you at AFA. I've seen you at other private groups recently in Los Angeles. You usually start, a lot of people don't know this, you usually start out, if you speak for an hour, the first 20 or 30 minutes is at the level or even funnier than some of the best stand-up comics than you will see today. You are absolutely hilarious. And I mean, really, really funny. Talk to us a little bit about that approach to leading into culture and politics from a perspective of opening up with an audience. And it isn't just a couple of, stem winder jokes and then getting into some boring politics. You're 20, 30 minutes in, and I mean, people are just rolling on the floor. Talk about that.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot to me, because I'm trying to, I think stand-up is one of the ultimate skills. It requires speed of thought. And people come up afterwards and say, "Oh, who writes your material?"
Yeah.
And it's always kind of weird for me, because I'm like, well, I'm just here speaking about the stuff I care about, and no one writes it. I do. I think what happens, is when you get to a certain age, you have so many layers of your life, and my life has been so much of a disaster in so many ways, personal, professional. If there's a mess up or a stuff up, I've done it. I think self-ridicule is a really useful tool on our side, because sometimes we spend so long trying to pretend to be great, and actually it's actually our flaws that make us the greatest. So and the humor thing came about because stuff I talk about, like we're headed towards South Africa, we're headed towards not having whites anymore, is so dark. And I really truly believe, I think there's a guy called Carpe who's been doing, how do you say
Carpe Donkum.
Yeah. I love him.
Meme Smith.
Because, yeah, he's been clever at utilizing one of our weapons well, which is a tool they use, but he's used it well. And I know that humor is one of our tools. And actually, conservatives, Republicans are funny and they have funny bones, but they don't get to exercise them much because we don't have many funny people on our side, or people are too scared to offend. And so that's why, and you're right, the last thing I did, the last gig in, I think, LA or wherever, it was just a riot. And so much so I got invited to go and do stand-up at the Comedy Central. And I was like, I don't think that's going to be, I'm not your girl. But I
Wait a minute. Why not, though? Because this is about converting hearts and minds. And if you are going to go for the culture, you warm people up and then they like you. See, the problem is that you've been, the narrative about you, the die is cast. And if so, outside of our network and our echo chamber, people don't know you for who you are and what your message is. You're just a hate monger, according to the left. Why not go on mainstream comedy networks?
Yes, and should they invite me again? I had to get out for lockdown, but should they invite me again, I will go. I have no fear of it. In fact, I want to do more stand-up. And any stand-up I've done stand-up in downtown LA in a grimy pub. And brilliantly, the guys came up after and went, I'm actually Team Trump, I just can't tell anyone. And they were lefty left. So I know that comedy can win things for us. I'm delighted to do it. I'd love to be Trump's warm-up act. I know that would work at one of his...
hey, Nigel Farage just came to Tulsa last weekend for 24 hours. I'm sure they can bring you.
I'm sure so. So look, yes, more stand-up to come, more funnies, mostly laughing at myself, but also because I know one of the things we need to do, and it's something you do well, is help bring our side together, uplift them, and make them realize this is worth the fight. It isn't all doom and gloom. And I don't want to hear another speaker stand up and tell me the things I know about what's going wrong. I need people to tell me why we need to feel good about ourselves and to send people out the door ready to fight this fight. And I see that as my job. I think it's lazy to tell people the negative. I think it's hard work to be positive and upbeat and funny. And we need more hard workers speaking at our functions and our engagements, I think, in my personal opinion.
Well, continue doing what you're doing. Tell everybody where they could find you now. You're no longer on Twitter.
Yes. Thank you. So I migrated to Parler. That's Parler. So if you followed me on Twitter, it's the same handle at capital K, capital T Hopkins on a site called Parler. And Parler app was set up by John. He's a big Second Amendment guy, and he's really just hoping to give people space to continue to share their opinions, whatever they are. So do maybe check out Parler if you're in the mood for social media.
Yeah, and Parlay, there's also Clout Hub, which is also coming on strong. And you also are on Instagram, I remember just following you.
Yeah, _Katie_Hopkins. So I'm on Instagram still. I mean, sure they'll remove me from there soonest, but what I would say is we're getting to this point now where people will follow us and seek us out. And I still think there's going to be a lot of joy when we all get back together. That's going to be so joy, that's going to be something really special. And look forward to that. Don't allow yourself to dwell on feeling put away. Know that we are going to get back together. It is going to be exciting and spectacular. And you're never on your own. We are many, and together we stand strong.
Katie Hopkins, thank you so much for joining us this week. Greatly appreciate it. And we'll have to have you back on again soon. And I can't wait to see you when you're back over in the States or when I'm back in England, which may be happening depending upon what happens with the election. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Cheers. You've been a big stalwart supporter of Israel. Last time I had you on the show, we spoke about this. Is there a genuine concern right now in England regarding the anti-Semitism that we see in the labor movement? And is that what is preventing them from taking over?
It's terrifying. Labour are basically the party of anti-Semitism. They just sided with Imran Khan and the Pakistanis, and the Pakistanis really are on the march in the UK. My Jewish friends are leaving en masse. They are either going to America, most are going to Israel. You see, there's an exodus happening in Paris. 8,000 Jews left there last year, and Israel has got so many things right. It doesn't stand for any nonsense. You blow up or you stab one of our people, we take your house down. It's built itself a great big wall. It's 3 meters thick. It's even thicker than AOC. And it also has national service, and that's what we need. People who are proud of their nation. Israel has so much right. I can't say enough good things. The only thing that's bad about Israel is that I'm not Jewish.
Well,
I can't run there myself.
I know, but you're a bigger supporter than so many Jews I even know.
I know, and that's the thing. The people that criticize me the most when I try and tell the story of Jewish families needing to get out, it's the leftist Jews. It's organizations like the Board of Deputies in the UK that are so allied with the Muslim Council. It's like they're deaf and they're blind and dumb to the issue facing Jewish families.
All right, last question for you. You've been speaking about the leftist march through the institutions. I just saw a report this week that suggested that there's a group in England that are trying to get rid of private schools.
Yes.
Have you seen this? They only want the children to be educated in state institutions.
It's the Labour Party. It's not a group in England. It's the Labour Party. It's the opposition want to shut down state schools. Not only that, they want to take the endowments, expropriate the land, expropriate the buildings. My children all go to private schools, so we don't have to associate with the left. People don't understand the maths on this. I pay my private school 3 places. I also pay 3 state school places. I give up 3 places for someone else's children. They don't get the maths on this. This will cost the country millions. It's just the politics of envy and the politics of greed that will never happen and will never take us anywhere. But yeah, they want to shut down private schools.
Is there a pushback on this?
I think there's just an acceptance that they've now gone into the kind of Bernie Sanders kind of nonsense territory. Free unicorns for everybody. And so we're just going, this will never happen. This will collapse the state. We simply can't afford for it to happen. We cannot afford an anti-Semite, an IRA supporter at number 10. That is the bottom line. It's why we need to back Boris.